Good morning, I'm Ranger Dave and this is West Valley Rural. Now, some of you might be wondering where did you get the name Ranger Dave from? Some people ask, where'd that come from? Well, it came from the topic we're going to be talking about today, birding. Yeah, birding is quite an interesting activity. It has a long history, and we got involved in birding back when Ruby was, like 5, 6 years old, and we spent well over a decade. I mean, not just a little bit of birding activity, but well involved, volunteering for some birding festivals. I led plenty of school talks, school walks, and took people out in the woods on a regular basis. And you know what? They all came back. Now, some of those school groups, you know what? There were some kids, I really did want to lose them in the woods. I really did, but I never did. So I'm Ranger Dave, and I will not lose you in the woods no matter how you behave. So anyhow, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, and it's going to be birds. And we're going to first start off in my library, because essentially every time I did a bird walk and talk, I would always give a short history on birding, and that's what we're going to do right now. So let's go to the library. Now, where did birding get its start? I'm going to give you a little history here, and it's pretty much the same history that I would always give essentially at the nature preserve whenever I was going to take a group out. It was always funny to see, here we're going to be talking about birds, and I would always be bringing a stack of books. And because it's really helpful to understand, it has a long history. At the same time, you're getting involved at a level that you can really make a difference. And I don't think people really understand that, because, again, once you understand the history, individuals have really made a difference in this activity. All starts, well, back in the turn of the century there with people like John Muir. He was a naturalist. He was a friend of Teddy Roosevelt. And Teddy Roosevelt was quite the birder as well. Most people do not realize that. And he was known for birding at the time. A lot of times at this period of time, a lot of times people would shoot the birds. Ways to see them up close weren't easy. Okay, so this is before the age of really good optics. So you wind up shooting the birds, and putting them on a table and then examining them for the colors and things like that. And then along came James Audubon, who not only did that, he was advent of identifying them by a book, and he would paint these pictures of these birds in huge pictures. And he was, unfortunately, he was virtually penniless. A lot of these people that are pioneers, and there's a general theme here. They start out with a love for birds and essentially risk it all, and wind up in the end quite famous. Then after these torch gets kind of passed, and then off to this guy named Roger Tory Peterson, who essentially not only started taking advantage of these pictures that Audubon did, he started doing some of his own. And not only that, starting to take measurements and getting down into little details. And he wrote his field guide, and that field guide was used for quite a few years, and it still is. You're going to find out if you get involved in birding, everybody has their own field guide that they love, and that's good. But it tends to be the field guide that they started with, and that I find is really interesting. So I learned that over the years, of whatever field guide a person came into, you could almost tell when they took up birding. The older folks, the seniors, they love the Petersons. The younger folks, well, I'll show you the ones that we grew up really liking. So, along comes Peterson. He develops birds, but birds at that time in the 50s, 60s, and 70s is just the purview of some oddballs. Okay, up until the time of this guy, guy named Ken Kaufman. Okay, now he was a birder, and then he essentially decided to, for his big year, and again, this is before the big year really took off. He decided to quit his job. Essentially, he gave up he hitchhiked across the country for his big year. This is when it was kind of safe to hitchhike still. I wouldn't recommend it. But essentially, this guy hitchhiked across the country, essentially doing his big year, seeing as many birds as he could. And then he wrote his memoir, Kingbird Highway, and also he developed the Ken Kaufman Field Guide to Birds. Again, here you have somebody that gave up everything, devoted it to birds, becomes famous. Okay, so this was, you had the Peterson, then you had the Kaufman in the 1970s, then along comes this other guy, David Allen Sibley. Now this guy's another guy. Quits college. Whoa, you wouldn't recommend that. Quits college. Takes up birding. Okay? Essentially does his own field guide. And you can see how this one's seen the works in our family. This was published, and he received the national recognition pretty much as late as 2002. So when we was first starting birding, this was still relatively new, okay? But you're going to see the younger generation that takes up birding later, they love their Sibley. And so you could see how the detail, you don't have to go into the woods knowing all the detail. What you do is you get your basics down. And then you kind of like, which category is it? And then you start looking up the category. And then you start narrowing it down to the various birds. Now, again, this guy gets famous for birds to the point where you can get the eastern version and the birds of the west. Essentially, if you're traveling east, well, you might not need to take that big old Sibley with you. This fits much more readily in a backpack. So we have both. Now, birding in the 1990s, early 2000s is really starting to catch on. Then along comes this guy. Okay. This guy named Greg Miller. Okay. He essentially, long story short, his life just becomes a mess. And he decides to go on his big year. It gets written down. This guy gets followed. Another guy writes the story of his life, and it comes out in this book. When we started taking up the first edition, when we started birding, the first edition had just came out. Okay. It was passed around, and I really didn't think, I'm going to see birds. I don't need to read, at that point in time, I was not really interested. And then along comes the movie. That's when it really takes off. And Jack Black, this is actually interesting. It was Jack Black's first time playing an actual real human being and not a fictional character. So essentially, Jack Black followed around Greg Miller to all the birding festivals they would go, and it just watched. And so, and essentially to learn how an actual birder acts and reacts. But if you've seen the movie, I recommend you see the movie. Do people do some crazy stuff in order to see birds? Yeah. That stuff actually does happen. It's one of our favorite films, and because we did I forget what year it was. We did an Arizona big year, and did we get in a car and drive hours to potentially see just one bird? Yeah, we did. So that kind of stuff happens. I remember when there was a green kingfisher appeared at the Hassayampa River Preserve. That actually made news, not just local news, in some areas national news. because it was a bird only seen in South America, and in the Yucatan Peninsula. And all of a sudden, this bird appears up this Hassayampa River in Wickenburg. You had people flying in from all over the country to see that. I got the picture here someplace. But after we took up birding, we actually got involved in mist netting, a bird banding project, which we did that for about 10 years, and got our Nature Conservancy pins. And then we had to learn to use, get a load of this, the pile. Now this is essentially considered the Bible of birds. Again, you can see the evolution of books. Now, get a look at that detail. Okay, you would catch these birds in these mist nets. You get there early in the morning to the Hassayampa River Reserve. You would set up the mist nets, and then you would go periodically check the mist nets, see what flew in. You would get them out of the nets, put them in a bag, a canvas bag, and walk back to the table, pull them out of the bag. You would essentially get the birds out and essentially check all the measurements based on pile, and record that. And essentially it was actual real field science that gets recorded and sent to not only Game and Fish, but national places. So it was this is one of those areas where your children can really become a part of actual real science, because there's things with cell phones. Everybody's got their cell phone. I'm talking to mine now, but there's apps called eBird. Okay, now eBird, essentially you wind up recording what you see, when you saw it, and just the basic details, and it gets recorded, and it's for your personal benefit as well. You can keep your life list and just record it, but it also goes to national list. So think about this. You've got a national source. Instead of one field scientist, and the government field scientist being out in the field at a time, on any given weekend there are thousands of potentially amateur field scientists in the field recording birds, and the information that they have is really quite extraordinary, that they have access to now because of people in the field, essentially adults and even children in the field. So what do you need for birding? Essentially binoculars, field guides. When you go to a local area, you can pick up local field guides if you don't want to carry anything big. So we have several for whenever we travel to certain areas that go easily in a pocket. You bring binoculars. Now these are quite heavy, and I'm going to show you the Vortec. What's the difference between the two? You can see the difference? Okay. Now, I like these. I carried these for years. Pretty heavy, because I liked this type. Gives you a wider field of vision, okay, but not as far. Okay, I won't be able to see as far with these, but I got a wider field of vision. Just one of the things that I liked. Now, your other binoculars, essentially, there are other brands, but this is a Vortex. Essentially, you got your cap. These can see a lot farther, but on a smaller scale. So you could be able to essentially see birds much farther than this and get that much detail. They have come with a handy strap that you can hang and just hang off here, so you don't have to carry them all the time. I had to carry these all the time. There's no strap for that. So then you just go out in the field and see what you see and mark down, and essentially you never know what and where it will take you. Essentially, we got involved with a number of organizations, and they sponsored 1 year for our daughter to go to the Colorado camp, and she wound up getting published back in 2015. And she wrote about her experiences at Colorado camp. So you and your kids, essentially, is a great family activity. What can the kids learn during birding? Why would you want your kids to take up birding? Well, you have to learn to be quiet. You have to learn to observe. Okay? You have to learn to take notes. You have to learn to be courteous. Got to be quiet for other birders might be in the area. Observation skills. All the things that you would want your kid to learn are standard with birding. They have to learn these things with birding. So should you encourage your kids to take up birding? Yeah, you should. It's not something I would discourage. Now, and think about this, in the long history, all these people that quit their jobs and took up birding and, became famous. Well, if your kid decides, young one decides to say, you know what, Mom, I'm going to quit my job and take up birding. Well, I can only say it's worked before. So let's go outside. Now, whenever we'd go to various birding festivals, there would always be, not everybody can hike. Especially, again, birding has a long history, and you got some folks that have been birders a long time, and they just, they just can't do that trudge in the woods like they used to. And almost everywhere we would go, there would be some kind of version of an armchair birding area where you just set up chairs, you got your feeders, and you just hang out and see what comes into those feeders, and it makes it real easy. So in our yard, we have our own version of an armchair birding area. And so, you just go out there, you get your drinks, you just park yourself in the chair, nice and quiet. You get your binoculars if necessary. It's close enough you typically don't even need binoculars. But then you just essentially see what flies in. Now, Arizona has, is very much on a migratory highway for a lot of birds. In fact, Arizona is one of the few states that if you're going to do a big year, you have to go to Arizona, because it's just certain birds, fly up through Mexico heading to Canada, and it's the land bridge right through Mexico up to Canada. Arizona gets approximately 325 to 350 species can be found in Arizona. In any typical migratory cycle. So it's quite a haul that you can do in a very short. You can cover a lot of grounds if you're cover a lot of numbers ground if you're doing a big year. If you just head to Arizona, and it's the other states that are in that list essentially are coastal states. So Arizona's number 4, and we don't have a coast. So that just tells you how many species can be found in Arizona. And so you go hiking, or you just set up a nice little armchair birding area like we've got right there. And in our case, you just kind of hang out nice and quiet. Now, I want a short little word about bird houses. I mean, when you want to attract birds to your place, of course, everybody thinks of the feeders, everybody thinks of the waterers, but bird houses become quite an interesting factor. One way to attract birds to your house, and I've got 2 here. It's kind of like a personal evolution of bird houses on our place. Essentially, this one over here, that birdhouse, believe it or not, is well over 30 years old. It's one of the first birdhouses I put on the property, and it still gets used. What happens is, the trees grow, the wood, kind of deteriorates a little bit. I pull it down, and I rehabilitate it. This one finally fell out of the tree. What happens is you put your nail, and the tree grows. And essentially, gradually it pushes its way through the wood, and then it just falls out of the tree. So if you build them sturdy enough, you can have a birdhouse that lasts you a good, long time. Now, this one has the circles, your standard circle. Well, okay, that's good, but you can have a birdhouse fill up, and then eventually no other bird's going to be want to use it because it's all filled up. So I started designing my birdhouses years ago with this in mind, more of a square. And some birds, they're going to want the hole. That's granted. But your standard sparrow out in Arizona here, They don't mind this big space. In fact, you can see that. Well, it's gotten used, and what makes it easy, you just get, if it gets full up, you just get your ladder and you just climb up and you pull some of it out. You just pull some of it out, and that it gives more space for the bird to continue to build on top of it. You always want to leave a little bit because it shows, hey, a bird has been here before. Maybe I'll move in now. If it's completely clean, it takes a little while for birds to get used to the idea, hey, maybe I should move in. Another thing that I did with all my other bird houses, I built them very sturdy. They're screwed rather than my original bird houses. They're nailed. But this is built real sturdy. If a board breaks, I just unscrew it, put a new board on, put it back up in the tree. We're all screwed together. And I added numbers. Which, why would you do that? Well, occasionally take a bird survey. And, write down, when you've got over 30 bird houses on your place, it becomes a interesting thing that you want to tell your family, I saw such and such a birdhouse. Well, you give, which tree? Well, all I'd have to do was say, so-and-so's, I got birds in 2D. Gives them a little address. So my bird houses have addresses, which makes for better reporting when you're trying to communicate what birdhouse you need to be looking at. So when you build your birdhouses, and maybe I'll do a video on how to build birdhouses, but build them nice and sturdy. But like I say, this one's well over 30 years old. This one's probably in its 20s. And again, this one's got to be repaired a little bit. And it's new and put back up in a tree. So we have our feeders in various spots, but this is our main armchair birding place. You got the feeders up there. And whenever you come into a birding area, it takes a little while. You just got to be patient and quiet and kind of slink in there, look nice and quiet, and try not to disturb. And just wait. I can see some sparrows up in the tree, just kind of hanging out. They're waiting to come in. And then what I also is I put my chicken waterers out here, because you got a waterer over there that I fill that sometimes in summertime, but sufficient for waterers is the chicken waterers. So you got your feed, you got your water. It's a good area for the birds to come in. So birding is a relaxing activity. Now you can go hike in the woods activity. It's a teaching activity. It's a learning activity, travel activity. It's got everything that you can enjoy, from more active to more solitude to a little bit more on a quiet basis. And takes, doesn't cost a whole lot. And that's a plus with any kind of hobby these days, especially with kids and their, how much does it cost to do such and such at school? Well, kid needs a book, kid needs a pair of binoculars, and a kid is a birder. And that's where it all starts. Well, I hope you learned a little bit and maybe understand the, outdoor activity called birding a little bit better. It's really quite enjoyable. It involves exercise, it involves homework, and it's something that I really encourage a lot of new parents. Get your kids involved in birding, and you will not be disappointed. Have I wanted to lose some kids in the woods? Yeah, but never did. And it's just fun. It's just fun. You get to you travel, you learn geography, you learn all kinds of things, and it involves a simple thing, birding. So I'm Ranger Dave, and I will not lose you or your kids in the woods, even if you've earned being lost in the woods. And I'll see you next time.